My name is Dane, and at 28 years old, I never thought I would have to choose between my health and my family. When my parents told me they couldn't afford to help with my life-saving medication, but then sent my sister on a first-class European vacation, something inside me finally broke. Years of favoritism culminated in that moment of brutal clarity. So no, I do not show up for holidays anymore, and their shock says everything about why I had to walk away. Before I dive into how my family broke my heart for the last time, let me know where you are watching from. Hit subscribe if you have ever had to choose your own well-being over family expectations. I was 19 and halfway through my sophomore year of college when the diagnosis came. What I had dismissed as normal fatigue from pulling all-nighters suddenly had a name, an autoimmune disease, that would require lifelong management. The doctor spoke in a calm, measured tone as he explained how my immune system was essentially attacking my own body, but all I could think about was how I was going to tell my parents. The symptoms had started gradually. First came the unexplained fatigue that sleep couldn't fix, then joint pain that made climbing the 3 flights of stairs to my economics class feel like scaling Mount Everest, morning stiffness that took hours to loosen, random fevers that would spike and then disappear. By the time I finally dragged myself to the campus health center, I had lost 15 pounds and was falling behind in all my classes. This isn't something that will just go away. Dr. Reynolds told me during that first appointment. He was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and glasses that constantly slid down his nose. With proper medication, you can live a relatively normal life. Without it, your condition will progressively worsen. The medication he prescribed cost $400 per month with my student insurance. $400 I definitely didn't have. When I called home to explain the situation, my father's first question wasn't about my health or how I was coping with the diagnosis. It was, "Are you sure you need this specific medication? There must be cheaper alternatives." There weren't cheaper alternatives. Dr. Reynolds had already prescribed the generic version. I tried explaining this to my parents during our weekly calls, but they always steered the conversation toward how I should be more careful with my money, as if I had blown my savings on parties, instead of textbooks and rent. College became a balancing act of managing my health while trying to keep up with my courses. I had to drop from 5 classes to 3, extending my graduation timeline by a year and a half. Each semester felt like running a marathon with weights strapped to my ankles. The mornings I could barely get out of bed. The assignments completed, while fighting through brain fog so thick, I had to read paragraphs 5 times to comprehend them. I tried working part-time jobs to cover my medical expenses, but the physical toll was severe. A 4-hour shift as a barista would leave me bedridden for the entire next day. When I worked at the campus bookstore, I had to hide in the storage room during breaks to take my medication and rest. My manager, a kind woman named Susan, would pretend not to notice when I disappeared for 15 minutes, but I knew I couldn't keep asking for special accommodations. My parents continued to minimize my condition whenever I brought it up. "Everyone gets tired," my mother would say. "When I was your age, I worked 2 jobs and still graduated on time." My father would add, "Maybe you're just not trying hard enough. Mind over matter, you know." They had always been like this, prioritizing academic and professional achievement above all else, including health. But I had hoped that a medical diagnosis might shift their perspective. It didn't. During my junior year, my insurance changed, and the medication cost jumped to $600 monthly. I remember sitting in Dr. Reynolds' office, trying not to cry, as he explained the importance of staying on my treatment plan. "Dane, I understand the financial strain, but discontinuing your medication could lead to serious complications," he said, leaning forward in his chair. "We're talking about potential organ damage that could become permanent." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without my voice cracking. When I left his office, I called my parents again, this time with more specific details about what could happen if I couldn't afford my medication. "We're really stretched thin right now," my father responded after a long pause. "Your sister's college tuition just increased, and we've had to dip into our savings." My mother chimed in, "Maybe you could move back home and take classes online. That would save on rent." Moving back home wasn't a viable option. My parents lived in a small town with limited job opportunities, and even fewer medical specialists. The university hospital had resources specifically for patients with my condition. Plus, I had built a support system of friends who understood my limitations and helped when things got rough. So I doubled down on my efforts to manage on my own. I took a second part-time job grading papers for a professor, even though sitting at a desk for hours made my joints swell painfully. I applied for every scholarship and grant I could find. I started a GoFundMe that raised enough for 2 months of medication before donations trickled to a stop. All the while, my health continued to deteriorate. There were days when the pain was so bad I couldn't type on my laptop. Nights when I would wake up drenched in sweat from fevers. Mornings when my roommate had to help me get dressed, because my hands wouldn't cooperate. Through it all, my parents maintained their distance both emotionally and financially. "You need to learn to be independent," my father would say during our increasingly brief phone calls. "Everyone has challenges in life." I graduated a year and a half late with student debt that made my stomach churn, and a body that felt decades older than it should. But I had my degree, and I had survived. What I didn't have was the unconditional support from my parents that I so desperately needed. What I didn't realize then was that their refusal to help with my medication wasn't about money at all. It was about something much more painful that I was still trying to deny. The favoritism toward my sister Avery started long before my diagnosis. Looking back, I can see it clearly in the family photos that line my parents' hallway. Avery's birthday parties were elaborate affairs with professional photographers and custom cakes. Mine were afterthoughts, usually celebrated with a store-bought cake and whatever relatives happened to be around. When I was 12, I won first place in the regional science fair with a project on renewable energy. My parents attended the ceremony, but left early because Avery, then 9, had a dance recital the same evening. "We'll take you out for ice cream tomorrow to celebrate," my mother promised. That tomorrow never came. Meanwhile, Avery's participation trophies and certificates of attendance were framed and displayed prominently in our living room. When she got a B- in algebra, my parents hired a private tutor and took her out for a special dinner to celebrate her hard work. When I maintained a 4.0 GPA throughout high school while working weekends at the local grocery store, my father's response was, "That is what we expect from you." Family vacations revolved around Avery's interests. If she wanted to go to Disney World, we went to Disney World, even though I had been begging to visit the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. for years. "Avery is younger," my mother would explain. "We need to make memories while she still believes in magic." When I confronted my parents about the disparity in how they treated us, they always had explanations ready. "Avery needs more support," or "You're naturally more independent," or, my personal favorite, "You're imagining things." This last one was particularly painful because it made me question my own perceptions and feelings. Holidays were especially difficult. Thanksgiving dinner conversations centered around Avery's latest accomplishments, while my contributions were met with polite nods before the topic changed. Christmas mornings revealed stockings bulging with thoughtful gifts for Avery and generic items for me. One year, she received a new laptop for making progress in her classes. I received a gift card to a bookstore despite having made the dean's list that same semester. My Uncle James, my father's younger brother, was the only one who seemed to notice the imbalance. During a 4th of July barbecue, when I was 17, he pulled me aside after watching my mother fuss over Avery's mosquito bite, while ignoring my request for help carrying the cooler despite my sprained wrist. "You know it is not your fault, right?" he said quietly, taking the cooler from my hands. "Some parents just have blind spots when it comes to their kids. It does not mean you are worth any less." His words were a lifeline I clung to during my darkest moments of self-doubt. Uncle James became my unofficial ally in family gatherings, making a point to ask about my achievements and interests when no one else would. Despite the clear preference for my sister, I continued trying to earn my parents' approval. I chose a practical major in college business administration, even though my passion was environmental science. I joined the clubs and organizations they deemed resume-worthy. I called home every Sunday without fail, even when the conversations left me feeling empty and unheard. It was exhausting, this constant striving for recognition that never came. Like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much I accomplished or how hard I worked, it was never enough to shift the family dynamic. The favoritism affected me in ways I didn't fully understand until I started therapy years later. I developed perfectionist tendencies, believing that if I could just achieve enough, my parents would finally see me. I struggled with self-worth, internalizing the message that I was somehow less deserving of care and attention. I had difficulty accepting help from others because I had been conditioned to believe my needs were secondary. Avery, for her part, seemed oblivious to the preferential treatment. Or if she noticed, she never acknowledged it. Why would she? The situation benefited her. She floated through life with a safety net I never had secure in the knowledge that our parents would catch her if she fell. When she changed her major 3 times in college, they called it finding her passion. When I considered switching from business to environmental science, they called it throwing away your future. After one particularly frustrating Thanksgiving dinner, where my parents spent 30 minutes discussing Avery's semester abroad in Italy, without once asking about my new job, I attempted again to address the elephant in the room. "Do you realize you have not asked me a single question about my life tonight?" I asked, as we cleared the dishes. My mother looked genuinely confused. "What do you mean? Of course we care about your life." "You have a funny way of showing it," I replied. My father stepped in then, his voice taking on the stern tone I had come to dread. "Dane, your sister is sharing exciting news about her experiences. Not everything has to be about you all the time." The irony of his statement would have been laughable if it hadn't hurt so much. Nothing was ever about me. Not once. Not even when I was diagnosed with a chronic illness that completely altered the course of my life. Uncle James, who had witnessed the exchange, found me later as I was sitting alone on the back porch. "Your father was always like that," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "Even when we were kids, he saw the world exactly how he wanted to see it, not how it actually was." "How do you deal with it?" I asked. He shrugged. "Limited contact and very low expectations. I love my brother, but I learned a long time ago that I cannot change him." That conversation with Uncle James planted the first seed of what would eventually become my own strategy for dealing with my parents. But it would take the medication crisis and its aftermath for that seed to fully germinate. The pattern continued through my graduation and into my early career. My accomplishments were acknowledged with perfunctory congratulations, while Avery's smallest victories were celebrated extensively. I continued to hope that something would change, that my parents would eventually see me as equally worthy of their love and support. That hope, fragile as it was, kept me tethered to them despite the constant disappointment. But then came the medication crisis that would finally force me to see the truth I had been avoiding for years. 3 years after graduation, I was working as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized company in Philadelphia. The job came with health insurance, but the company switched providers at the beginning of the year, and my new plan had a significantly higher deductible. My medication, which had been relatively manageable at $200 per month under the old plan, suddenly jumped to $800 until I met the $5,000 deductible. $800 each month, just to keep my immune system from attacking my own body. I stared at the pharmacy receipt in disbelief, my hands shaking slightly. The pharmacist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked at me sympathetically. "You might want to talk to your doctor about patient assistance programs," she suggested. "Some pharmaceutical companies offer discounts for people in your situation." I nodded numbly and took my medication, my mind racing through calculations. Rent, utilities, student loan payments, groceries, and now this. The math did not add up no matter how I juggled the numbers. Dr. Reynolds tried to help when I explained the situation at my next appointment. He provided samples where he could and wrote a letter to the insurance company appealing their coverage decision. But these were temporary solutions to a much larger problem. "Have you considered asking family for help?" he asked carefully, knowing from our previous conversations that this was a sensitive topic. I had been avoiding that option, but with my savings rapidly dwindling and the physical toll of my condition becoming more severe, I finally swallowed my pride and called my parents. The conversation started pleasantly enough. My mother asked about the weather in Philadelphia and shared gossip about neighbors I barely remembered. My father inquired about work, nodding approvingly when I mentioned the possibility of a promotion later in the year. Then I took a deep breath and explained my situation. "The new insurance plan at work has changed, and my medication costs have quadrupled," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have been looking into assistance programs and second jobs, but I am really struggling right now. I hate to ask, but could you help me temporarily until I figure something out?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Then my father cleared his throat. "Dane, you know we would help if we could, but we are tight on money right now. The economy has everyone cutting back." My parents owned a spacious four-bedroom house in an affluent suburb. My father drove a luxury sedan that was never more than 2 years old. My mother's jewelry collection alone could probably fund a year of my medication. Tight on money was a relative term. "I am not asking for a handout," I clarified, feeling my chest tighten with anxiety. "Just a loan to get me through until the new fiscal year, when I can switch to a better insurance plan. I will pay back every cent." "Have you considered moving to a cheaper apartment?" my mother suggested. "Or maybe getting a roommate to split costs?" I lived in the smallest one-bedroom apartment I could find that was still within commuting distance to my job. A roommate would mean converting the living room into a bedroom and losing the small space where I could rest when the fatigue became overwhelming. "Or picking up some freelance work," my father added. "You are good with computers. Surely there are opportunities there." They did not understand. Or they did not want to understand. I was already working 50-hour weeks despite my doctor's recommendation to keep my stress levels down. I was already skipping meals to save money. I was already rationing my medication, taking it every other day instead of daily, as prescribed, which was causing my symptoms to flare more frequently. "This is not about budgeting better," I said, unable to keep the frustration from my voice. "This is about a medical necessity that costs $800 a month. I would not ask if I had any other option." "Well, we just do not have that kind of extra money right now," my father said firmly. "Your sister is planning to go to graduate school next year, and we need to save for that." Of course. Avery's hypothetical graduate school plans took precedence over my immediate health needs. "Right," I said flatly. "I understand." "I am sure things will work out," my mother added brightly. "You have always been resourceful." After hanging up, I sat on my couch for a long time, staring at nothing. The rejection hurt, but what hurt more was the realization that if Avery had been the one calling with a health crisis, their response would have been entirely different. The next day, I called my best friend Max. We had been roommates in college, and he was one of the few people who truly understood my family situation. "They said no," I told him when he picked up. "Those absolute jerks," he responded immediately. "How much do you need? I can transfer some money to you right now." Max was a first-year teacher at a public school. He made even less than I did, and had his own student loans to worry about. "I cannot take your money," I said, "but thanks for offering." "It is not taking if I am giving it freely," he argued. "That is what friends do." His generous offer made my parents' refusal sting even more sharply. Here was someone with far fewer resources willing to help without hesitation, while my own family, who had the means, would not. Over the next few weeks, I cobbled together a patchwork of solutions. I signed up for food delivery services on evenings and weekends, ignoring how the extra hours left me physically drained. I applied for a pharmaceutical assistance program that would take months to process. I sold my television and the nice watch my Uncle James had given me for graduation. And I rationed my medication even more severely, taking it only when symptoms became unbearable. Dr. Reynolds noticed the decline in my health at my next appointment. "Your inflammation markers are much higher than last time," he said, frowning at my lab results. "Are you taking your medication as prescribed?" I admitted the truth, unable to meet his concerned gaze. "Dane, I cannot stress enough how dangerous this is," he said. "Short term, you are experiencing more pain and fatigue than necessary. Long term, you are risking permanent organ damage." "I know," I said quietly, "but I cannot afford it right now." He made some calls and managed to secure 3 months' worth of samples from pharmaceutical representatives. It was a stopgap measure at best, but I was grateful for the reprieve. During this time, my health continued to deteriorate. The joint pain became so severe that some mornings I had to roll out of bed onto the floor because I could not sit up. The fatigue was crushing, making even simple tasks like cooking a meal feel insurmountable. I developed anemia as a complication, which added dizziness and shortness of breath to my growing list of symptoms. I stopped calling my parents, as frequently unable to bear their cheerful inquiries about my life when they had refused to help with the one thing I truly needed. When I did speak with them, I lied about how I was doing, claiming things were fine and I had figured it out. Pride is a powerful force, especially when you have spent your whole life trying to prove your worth. By month 3 of the insurance change, I had lost 12 pounds, called in sick, to work 6 times, and seriously considered moving back to my hometown, despite knowing it would be detrimental to both my career and my medical care. I was running out of options and running out of strength to keep fighting. Then came the social media post that changed everything. It was a random Tuesday evening. I was lying on my couch, too exhausted to cook dinner, but too nauseated from my condition to feel hungry anyway. My phone pinged with a notification from Instagram. Someone had tagged my sister Avery in a photo. Normally, I would have ignored it, but in my bored, pain-addled state, I tapped on the notification. The photo showed Avery lounging in what was clearly a first-class airplane seat, champagne flute in hand, with the caption, "Off to Europe. Thanks, Mom and Dad, for the graduation gift of a lifetime. First stop, Paris. Blessed. First class. Europe Adventure." I blinked, sure I had misread something. Graduation gift Avery had graduated over a year ago with a degree in communications that had taken her 6 years to complete, and first class to Europe. I scrolled through her profile, something I rarely did these days. There it was, post after post about her upcoming trip. A brand new designer luggage set. A shopping spree for Europe-appropriate clothes. Screenshots of luxury hotel confirmations in Paris, Rome, Barcelona, and London. My hands shook as I scrolled, not from my usual joint pain, but from a rising tide of disbelief and anger. 2 weeks ago, my parents had told me they could not afford to help with my medication. My medication that kept me functioning, that prevented permanent damage to my body, that allowed me to work and support myself. But they could afford to send my sister on a first-class European vacation. I put down my phone and closed my eyes, trying to regulate my breathing as the room seemed to spin around me. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe she had saved up for this herself. Maybe it was a prize she had won. Maybe anything other than what it appeared to be. My phone rang. It was Max calling for our weekly check-in. "You okay, man?" "You sound weird," he said, as soon as I answered. "Did you see Avery's Instagram?" I asked without preamble. "No." "What did Princess Perfect do now?" I explained what I had just discovered, my voice growing more strained with each word. "Are you kidding me?" Max exclaimed. "After they told you they could not help with your meds, that is beyond messed up, Dane." "Maybe I am misunderstanding," I said, still, trying to give my parents the benefit of the doubt despite the evidence. "Maybe she saved up for it." "Call her and ask," Max suggested, straight from the source. I did not want to. I really did not want to. But I needed to know. I hung up with Max and immediately dialed Avery's number, surprising myself with my own boldness. She answered on the 4th ring, airport announcements, audible in the background. "Dane, this is a surprise," she said. "What is up?" "I saw your Instagram posts," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Quite a graduation gift." "I know, right?" She gushed, oblivious to my tone. "Mom and Dad said they wanted to do something special since I finally finished college. 3 weeks in Europe, all expenses paid. They even booked first-class tickets and 5-star hotels. I am at the airport lounge right now, and they have free sushi." Each word felt like a physical blow. My parents had always favored Avery, but this was different. This was them actively choosing her wants over my needs. This was them deciding that her luxury vacation was more important than my health. "That must have cost a lot," I said carefully. "Oh yeah, like 15,000 or something crazy. Dad mentioned it when he was showing me the itinerary they put together. They planned everything. They are the best, right?" $15,000. The amount echoed in my head. That would cover over a year and a half of my medication at current prices. A year and a half of not having to choose between rent and health. A year and a half of taking my full dosage, instead of dangerous rationing. "Yeah," I managed to say, "the best." After mumbling some excuse about needing to go, I ended the call and immediately ran to the bathroom, where I threw up from the sheer stress and shock of the revelation. As I knelt on the cold tile floor, a series of text notifications came through on my phone. It was Kyle, a mutual friend from high school, who still kept in touch with both me and Avery. "Dude, did you see your sister's Europe trip?" the first message read. Then came a series of screenshots from her Facebook page, which I did not follow, pictures of the business class lounge, a selfie with her new passport holder that our mother had apparently purchased specially for the trip, a photo of the detailed itinerary my parents had created, including Michelin star restaurant reservations and tickets to exclusive events. The final screenshot was the most painful photo of my parents at the airport with Avery, all three smiling widely. The caption read, "Could not have asked for more supportive parents. Love you guys for making this dream come true." I did not remember calling Max back, but suddenly he was on the phone, his voice concerned. "I am coming over," he said firmly. "Do not do anything until I get there." I must have agreed, because 45 minutes later, he was at my door, with takeout food and a determined expression. "You need to eat something," he said, placing containers of Thai food on my coffee table. "Then we are going to figure this out." I picked at the pad thai, without tasting it, my mind still reeling from the discovery. "I do not understand," I said. "It is not like they do not know how much I am struggling. I told them exactly what was happening with my health with the medication costs. They just did not care." Max's expression was grim. "I hate to say it, but I think you need to confront them directly. Not over the phone. In person." The thought made my stomach clench with anxiety, but he was right. This was not a conversation that could happen remotely. I needed to see their faces when they explained why Avery's vacation was more important than keeping me healthy. "I will go this weekend," I decided. "Will you drive me?" "I do not think I should drive myself right now." Max nodded without hesitation. "Of course. Whatever you need." That night I barely slept. My mind kept replaying every instance of favoritism throughout my life. But now, with the new understanding that it wasn't just about preferring Avery. It was about actively devaluing me, my health, my very existence. The realization was both clarifying and devastating. By morning, my body was responding to the emotional stress with a full flare of symptoms. Joint pain radiated through my knees and wrists. Fatigue pressed down on me like a physical weight. But underneath the physical discomfort was a new feeling: resolve. For the first time, I was angry instead of hurt. And that anger propelled me forward when hurt would have kept me paralyzed. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, even when I probably should have. Then I texted my parents, "Need to see you this weekend. Important." My father responded with a terse, "We'll be home," and that was that. The confrontation was set. As Max drove me to my parents' house that Saturday, I rehearsed what I wanted to say. How to articulate the depth of the betrayal without breaking down. How to make them understand what they had done without sounding like I was simply jealous of Avery. "Remember," Max said as we pulled onto my parents' street, "no matter what excuses they give you, deserve better than this. Do not let them make you doubt yourself." I nodded, grateful beyond words for his support. Then I squared my shoulders and prepared to finally stand up for myself. My parents' house looked exactly as it always had: meticulously maintained lawn, fresh paint, seasonal wreath on the front door. It was the picture of upper-middle-class suburban prosperity. I stood on the porch for a moment, gathering my courage before ringing the doorbell. My mother answered, her smile faltering slightly when she saw my expression. "Dane, we were not expecting you so early. And you brought your friend." "Max, right." "Max is waiting in the car," I said. "I need to talk to you and Dad. Alone." Something in my tone must have alerted her that this wasn't a routine visit. She stepped back, allowing me to enter the familiar foyer with its family photos chronicling our lives. I noticed, not for the first time, how Avery featured prominently in most of them while I was often at the edges or absent entirely. "Robert," my mother called, "Dane is here to talk to us." My father emerged from his home office, reading glasses perched on his nose and a puzzled expression on his face. "Dane." This sounded urgent on the phone. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said simply. "Everything is not all right. Can we sit down?" They exchanged a glance I couldn't interpret before leading me to the living room. I remained standing, too agitated to sit. I saw Avery's social media posts. I began, my voice steadier than I expected. About her first-class trip to Europe. The $15,000 vacation you paid for. My mother's hand flew to her throat, a habitual gesture when she was uncomfortable. My father's expression hardened. "Is that what this visit is about? Your sister's graduation gift?" he asked, his tone dismissive. 2 weeks ago, I continued, ignoring his question. "I called you because I couldn't afford my medication." Medication I need to function. To prevent permanent organ damage. You told me you were tight on money and couldn't help. We are tight on money, my father insisted. The economy, property taxes. Stop. I interrupted something I had rarely dared to do with him. Just stop. You spent $15,000 on a luxury vacation for Avery, first-class flights, 5-star hotels, Michelin-star restaurants. That money could have covered my medication for a year and a half. My mother looked uncomfortable but defensive. That was different. We had been planning Avery's graduation trip for years. It was a special occasion. And my health isn't special enough. I asked, my voice rising, despite my efforts to stay calm. Do you understand what happens when I can't afford my full dosage? The pain, the fatigue, the permanent damage to my body? Of course we care about your health, my mother said, sounding wounded. But you have always been so independent. We thought you would figure it out. Figure it out, I repeated incredulously. Figure out how to magically make $800 appear every month while working full-time, with a chronic illness that makes every day a struggle. My father stood up, his posture rigid. Watch your tone, Dane. Your mother and I have supported you throughout your life. We put you through college. You paid part of my tuition, I corrected. I worked and took out loans for the rest. Meanwhile, you paid for everything for Avery, including the 6 years it took her to finish a 4-year degree. Your sister needed more support, my father said. She has always been more sensitive. There it was. The same excuse they had always given for the disparity in how they treated us. Avery needed more. Avery deserved more. Avery. And I needed medication, I said quietly. I still do. But you decided that her vacation was more important than my health. That is not fair, my mother protested. The trip was already booked and paid for when you called about your medication. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. And you didn't think to mention that? To say, we just spent $15,000 on your sister, so we can't help you right now. You let me believe you were struggling financially. We didn't want you to feel bad about Avery's gift, my mother admitted. No, you didn't want to admit the truth that you prioritize her wants over my needs. That you always have. The front door opened then, and to my shock, Avery walked in, followed by Uncle James. This was not part of my plan. I had deliberately chosen this weekend because Avery was supposed to be in Europe. Surprise visit, before I leave tomorrow. Avery announced cheerfully, then stopped short when she saw my expression. What's going on? Dane is upset about your Europe trip, my father explained, his tone, suggesting I was being childish. Uncle James looked between us, his expression concerned. What about the trip? Our parents spent $15,000 on it. I explained 2 weeks after telling me they couldn't help with my medication costs. Avery's eyes widened. Wait, you're having trouble affording your medication? I didn't know that. Of course you didn't, I said, not unkindly. This wasn't her fault, not really. They wouldn't want to worry you with my problems. Uncle James stepped further into the room, his expression troubled. Robert, Margaret, is this true? Dane needed help with medical expenses, and you refused. We didn't refuse my father, said defensively. We just couldn't do it at that time. Because you had spent the money on my trip. Avery said slowly, understanding dawning on her face. She turned to our parents. You should have told me. We could have postponed the trip. Nonsense, my mother said quickly. You deserved that trip after finally graduating. Dane is just being dramatic. He has always been jealous of the attention you receive. Her words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I had just explained, after laying bare how their choices were affecting my health, she was still dismissing my feelings as jealousy. This isn't about jealousy, I said, my voice shaking now. This is about the fact that you chose to fund a luxury vacation instead of helping me afford necessary medication. This is about you consistently prioritizing Avery's wants over my needs throughout our entire lives. That is enough, my father said sharply. I will not stand here and be accused of not caring about you. Everything we have done has been for both of our children. I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. That's simply not true, and you know it. If Avery had been the one with the chronic illness, you would have moved heaven and earth to make sure she had what she needed. But because it's me, I'm expected to figure it out on my own. Dane, my mother began, but I cut her off. No, I'm done. I've spent my entire life trying to earn the same love and support you give Avery freely. I'm done trying. I turned to leave, my body shaking with emotion and the physical toll of the confrontation. If you walk out that door, don't expect us to keep making exceptions for you. My father called after me. We have our limits too. I stopped and turned back one last time. Exceptions? When have you ever made an exception for me? When have you ever put me first? He had no answer. None of them did. Uncle James followed me out to the car where Max was waiting. Dane, wait. This isn't right. Let me help you. I appreciate it, Uncle James, but I can't keep pretending this family works for me. It doesn't. I understand, he said quietly, but I'm still your uncle. My door is always open to you. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat, and got into Max's car. As we drove away, the stress of the confrontation, coupled with my already fragile health, caught up with me. My vision blurred, my heart raced, and I felt myself sliding sideways in the seat. Dane, Max's voice sounded distant. I'm taking you to the hospital. The next thing I remember clearly is waking up in an emergency room, an IV in my arm, and a doctor explaining that I had experienced a severe flare triggered by stress, resulting in dangerously high inflammation levels and dehydration. You need to take your medication consistently, the doctor advised, unaware of the financial impossibility of his recommendation, and you need to reduce stress in your life. As I lay in that hospital bed, I made a decision that had been years in the making. I needed to create distance between myself and the source of so much of my stress, my family. It was no longer a choice between what I wanted and what they wanted. It was a choice between my health and their approval. And for the first time, I chose my health. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Max helped me move from my cramped one-bedroom apartment to a slightly larger place on the other side of Philadelphia. The new apartment was further from my parents' home, but closer to my job, reducing my commute time and allowing for more rest. This place has actual natural light, Max commented, as we carried the last box up the stairs. Your plants might actually survive here. I managed to smile, the first genuine one in weeks. The move felt symbolic, a physical manifestation of the emotional distance I was creating. New space, new boundaries, new life. The day after I moved, Uncle James called. I wanted to check on you, he said, and to let you know I spoke with your parents after you left. How did that go? I asked, not really wanting to know, but feeling I should. About as well as you'd expect. Robert is convinced you're overreacting. Margaret keeps saying you'll come around once you calm down. He sighed heavily. I tried to make them understand what they've done, but they're stuck in their own narrative. Thank you for trying, I said sincerely. But I've accepted that they may never see it from my perspective. What about your medication situation? He asked. I explained about the hospital stay, how it had resulted in a social worker connecting me with a patient advocacy group that helped me apply for a pharmaceutical assistance program. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it would cover most of my medication costs for the next 6 months. And after that, Uncle James pressed. I'm interviewing for a position with better benefits, I told him. It's with a larger company that has a more comprehensive health plan. What I didn't tell him was that I had also started attending a support group for people with chronic illnesses. It was there that I met Emily, a woman about my age with rheumatoid arthritis, who understood the daily struggle of living with an invisible disability. Emily quickly became an important part of my new life. She knew what it meant to cancel plans because of unexpected flares. She understood the frustration of explaining to healthy people why just pushing through wasn't always an option. Most importantly, she recognized the courage it took to set boundaries with family members who minimized health concerns. My mother used to tell me I was exaggerating my symptoms for attention, she confided during one of our early conversations. It took years of therapy for me to stop questioning my own experiences. With Emily's encouragement, I also started seeing a therapist who specialized in chronic illness and family dynamics. Dr. Patel helped me understand that the guilt I felt about distancing myself from my parents wasn't a sign that I was making the wrong choice. It was the result of years of conditioning to put their feelings above my own needs. Guilt is often the cost of setting healthy boundaries with people who aren't used to you having them, she explained. It doesn't mean the boundaries aren't necessary. As autumn turned to winter, The first major test of my new boundaries arrived Thanksgiving. My mother called 3 times in the week, leading up to the holiday, each message more insistent than the last. "You have to come home for Thanksgiving," her final voicemail declared. "Family is family regardless of disagreements. Avery is coming, and she specifically asked if you would be here." I called her back and calmly explained that I wouldn't be attending. "I've made other plans," I said, which was true. Max had invited me to join his family's celebration. "What other plans could be more important than your family?" my mother demanded. "Plans that don't require me to pretend everything is fine when it isn't?" I replied. She was silent for a moment before asking, "Is this still about the Europe trip? Avery ended up postponing it, you know. She felt too guilty after what you said." The fact that my mother thought this information would change my mind showed how completely she had missed the point. The issue wasn't the trip itself, it was what the trip represented. Years of inequity, years of my needs being secondary, years of feeling invisible in my own family. "This isn't about the trip," I said. "This is about me needing space to heal both physically and emotionally." "Well, your father is very upset," she said, as if that would be the deciding factor. "And what am I supposed to tell everyone when they ask where you are?" "The truth would be nice," I suggested. "But you can tell them whatever you want." After declining Thanksgiving, I received a barrage of text messages from Avery, ranging from confused to angry to pleading. "Mom is crying every day," one message read. "Dad barely talks at dinner. Is that what you wanted?" I didn't respond to most of them, but I did reply to her final question. What I wanted was to be valued as much as you are. What I wanted was parents who cared about my health as much as they care about your happiness. What I wanted was never going to happen. She didn't text again after that. Christmas brought another round of pressure this time, including calls from extended family members who had clearly heard a version of events that cast me as the villain. Aunt Cynthia left a particularly memorable voicemail about the importance of forgiveness and how no one is perfect, especially parents. I declined all invitations and instead spent Christmas Eve with Emily and her roommate, helping decorate a small artificial tree and watching holiday movies. On Christmas Day, Max and I volunteered at a local shelter serving meals, something I found far more meaningful than another tense family gathering would have been. In January, I received the job offer I had been hoping for. The new position came with better pay and, more importantly, a comprehensive health insurance plan that would make my medication affordable again. It felt like the universe was confirming that I had made the right choice in prioritizing my well-being. Meanwhile, Uncle James maintained contact, becoming a bridge between my old life and new one. He never pressured me to reconcile with my parents, but kept me updated on family news I might want to know. When he mentioned that he was hosting a small gathering for his birthday in February, I decided to attend knowing my parents wouldn't be there. What I didn't expect was for them to show up unannounced. I was in Uncle James's kitchen, helping Emily make coffee, when I heard the front door open and my mother's distinctive voice call out, "James, we brought that dessert you like from the bakery on Main Street." Uncle James appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression apologetic. "I didn't know they were coming," he said quickly. "They never responded to the invitation." Before I could decide whether to stay or leave, my parents were in the doorway. My mother's eyes widened at the sight of me, while my father's face immediately hardened. "Dane," my mother said, her voice a mixture of surprise and something that might have been hope. "We didn't know you would be here." "That makes 2 of us," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. An uncomfortable silence fell over the kitchen. Emily squeezed my hand supportively, which did not go unnoticed by my mother. "Are you going to introduce us to your friend?" she asked, an artificial brightness in her tone. I did briefly, without elaborating on our relationship. Emily, sensing the tension, excused herself to check on the coffee, leaving me alone with my parents. "You're looking well," my mother ventured. "Have you lost weight?" The irony of her question wasn't lost on me. I had indeed lost weight, but not in a healthy way. It was the result of stress and inconsistent medication. "I've been better," I said honestly, "but I'm getting there." My father, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Your mother has been very upset about you missing the holidays." It wasn't quite an accusation, but it wasn't far off. "I needed space," I said simply. "I still do." "Space is one thing," he replied. "Cutting off your family entirely is another." I haven't cut anyone off, I clarified. I've set boundaries. There's a difference. My mother looked like she wanted to say more, but Uncle James reappeared, suggesting we all move to the living room where other guests were waiting. The encounter was brief, but revealing. My parents still saw my actions as a personal attack, rather than a necessary step for my well-being. They were still more concerned with how my absence affected them than with the reasons behind it. As winter gave way to spring, I continued rebuilding my life around people who respected my boundaries and supported my health journey. Emily and I grew closer, eventually deciding to date officially. Max remained a steadfast friend, always ready with practical help or a listening ear. My new job challenged me in positive ways, and my health stabilized with consistent medication. I also continued therapy, working through the complex emotions tied to my family relationships. The anger that had initially fueled my decision to create distance gradually transformed into something quieter but more durable: acceptance. Acceptance that my parents might never change. Acceptance that the relationship I had always wanted with them might never exist. Acceptance that I deserved better than what they had been willing to give. By the time Easter approached, I felt strong enough to decline the invitation with minimal guilt. I won't be able to make it. I told my mother when she called, but I hope everyone has a nice time. This can't go on forever, Dane, she said, frustration evident in her voice. At some point you have to forgive and move forward. I agree, I said. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It doesn't mean going back to the way things were. Then what does it mean, she asked. It means I'm no longer waiting for you and Dad to be the parents I needed. It means I'm building a life that doesn't depend on your approval. It means I'm choosing my health over your expectations. She was quiet for a long moment before saying, I don't understand why you can't do that while still being part of the family. Because being part of the family as you define it has always required me to accept less than I deserve, I explained. And I can't do that anymore. It wasn't the resolution she wanted, but it was the truth. And speaking my truth without anger or resentment felt like the most significant step yet in my healing journey. As the months passed, my parents intensified their efforts to bring me back into the fold, but their methods revealed they still didn't understand the fundamental issues at hand. My mother enlisted relatives to call me with messages about how much my parents missed me. My father sent an email listing all the ways they had supported me throughout my life, as if keeping score could invalidate my feelings. Avery surprisingly took a different approach. After several months of alternating between angry texts and guilty silence, she called me one evening in late summer. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, she began without preamble. About being valued differently. About your needs versus my wants. I waited, unsure where she was going with this. I always knew Mom and Dad treated us differently, she continued. But I told myself it was because you were smarter, more capable. You didn't need the extra attention I got. That was their explanation too, I said. Yeah, well, I'm starting to see how messed up it was. Her voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Last month I lost my job. When I asked if I could move back home temporarily while I figured things out, Dad suggested I learn to be independent and figure it out on my own. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. That must have been hard to hear, I said, genuinely sympathetic. It was like suddenly being on the other side of their expectations, she admitted. For the first time, I understood a little bit of what you've been dealing with. We talked for nearly an hour, the longest real conversation we'd had as adults. Avery shared that she had started therapy too, working through her own complicated feelings about our family dynamic. She acknowledged that she had benefited from the inequity, without questioning it, and apologized for not seeing how it had affected me. I'm not asking you to forgive Mom and Dad, she said toward the end of our call. Or me, for that matter. I just wanted you to know that I get it now. At least I'm trying to. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. We began texting, occasionally sharing small updates about our lives. She met Emily during a video call and seemed genuinely happy for me. These tentative steps toward a new kind of sibling relationship were unexpected but welcome. Meanwhile, my life with Emily continued to deepen. We moved in together after a year of dating, finding an apartment that accommodated both our health needs, first floor, close to public transportation, with enough space for rest days. We developed routines that honored our energy limitations and celebrated our good days with small adventures. Uncle James remained a constant presence, the one family member who had consistently respected my boundaries while maintaining connection. When he invited us to his home for Thanksgiving, assuring me that my parents would not be there, Emily and I decided to accept. What I didn't anticipate was that my parents would once again show up unannounced. "They're here," Uncle James texted me, 30 minutes before Emily and I were due to arrive. "I didn't invite them. Your call if you want to come or not." Emily looked at me questioningly as I showed her the message. "What do you want to do?" I considered our options. We could cancel avoiding the confrontation, but also missing the chance to see Uncle James and the cousins we had planned to meet. We could go and risk a scene. Or we could go with clear expectations and boundaries. "Let's go," I decided. "But we'll leave if it becomes too much." When we arrived, my parents were already seated in the living room. My mother stood immediately taking a step toward me before stopping, uncertainty on her face. My father remained seated, his expression guarded. "Dane," my mother said, "and Emily, I'm glad you came." I nodded, not quite ready for false warmth. Uncle James invited us. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken by Uncle James ushering us toward the appetizers in the dining room. The early part of the gathering was tense, but civil, with conversations carefully steered toward neutral topics. Emily stayed close to me, her presence a steady reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. It wasn't until after dinner, when most of the guests had moved back to the living room for coffee, that my father approached me. "Could we speak privately for a moment?" he asked, his tone more subdued than I was used to hearing. I hesitated, then nodded. We stepped onto Uncle James's back porch, the November air crisp around us. "Your mother and I have been doing some thinking," he began, looking out at the yard rather than at me. "We may have, mishandled some things." It wasn't exactly an apology, but from my father it was significant. "The medication situation," he continued. "We should have helped you." "I see that now." "What changed your mind?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment before answering. "Avery, partly. She's been rather insistent that we examine our behavior, and your Uncle James hasn't minced words either." I waited, wondering if there was more. "And I had a health scare of my own," he added reluctantly. "Nothing serious in the end, but it made me think about what it would be like to need medical care and not be able to afford it." It wasn't a complete understanding, but it was something. A crack in the armor of self-righteousness that had defined my father for as long as I could remember. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "Does this mean you'll start coming around more? Your mother misses you terribly." And there it was. The expectation that a partial acknowledgement should immediately restore the relationship on their terms. "It's a start," I said. "But there's a lot more to work through before I'm ready for regular family gatherings." Disappointment flashed across his face, but he nodded. "I suppose that's fair." We rejoined the others, and the evening continued without further private conversations. But something had shifted, however slightly. In the months that followed, my parents made tentative efforts to respect my boundaries while maintaining contact. They asked about my health, instead of changing the subject. They refrained from guilt trips when I declined invitations. They even sent a check on my birthday with a note that said, "For anything you need," which I recognized as their version of acknowledging the medication issue. Avery continued her own journey of self-awareness, sometimes sharing insights from her therapy sessions that revealed how deeply the family dynamic had affected her too, albeit in different ways. She had been placed on a pedestal that made her fear failure and dependent on external validation. Breaking free from those patterns was its own challenge. Emily and I got engaged the following spring, a decision that felt right despite the relatively short time we had been together. When I called to tell my parents, my mother's first question wasn't about the wedding date or Emily's ring. It was, "Will you be happy?" It was such a simple question, but one they had never really asked before. Not about my education or career choices, and certainly not about my health decisions. "I already am," I told her honestly. As I approach my 30th birthday, I can look back at the past 2 years with a perspective I didn't have during the height of the medication crisis. The journey from hurt to healing wasn't linear or neat. There were setbacks and difficult days. There were moments when I questioned whether distancing myself from my family was the right choice. But my health has stabilized. My relationship with Emily has brought joy and partnership I never thought possible. My career has flourished without the constant drain of trying to earn parental approval. My friendships have deepened, particularly with those like Max, who stood by me during the darkest times. My relationship with my parents remains a work in progress. They have not fully acknowledged or apologized for the years of inequity, but they have begun to show more respect for my boundaries. It's not the close family bond I once yearned for, but it's a more honest one. Uncle James continues to be a bridge and a model for what supportive family can look like. Avery and I are building a sibling relationship based on mutual respect rather than competition for parental attention. The most profound change, though, has been internal. I no longer measure my worth by my parents' validation. I no longer accept being treated as less deserving of care and support. I no longer compromise my health to avoid rocking the boat. I've learned that sometimes the family you create is more nurturing than the one you were born into. I've learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for well-being. I've learned that healing doesn't always mean reconciliation on the old terms, but sometimes means creating new terms that honor your worth. Most importantly, I've learned that choosing your health, physical, emotional, mental, isn't just a one-time decision. It's a daily practice of self-respect that ripples outward, affecting every relationship and life choice. So, if you're facing a similar struggle, wondering if it's worth standing up for yourself when it means disappointing family expectations, know this: your health is non-negotiable. Your worth is not determined by others' ability to see it. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and ultimately for others is to break the patterns that keep everyone stuck. Have you ever had to choose your well-being over family expectations? Or found yourself creating boundaries with people who didn't understand why they were necessary? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content about navigating difficult family dynamics and the journey towards self-worth. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, you deserve to be valued, supported, and healthy, no matter what anyone else believes.